Is the RTX 5070 Ti dead? That's a question that I've been asking myself quite a lot recently. It's no secret that AMD have made big performance improvements to their 9070 XT, and with GPU prices, availability and stock finally starting to normalize, could the 9070 XT finally seize upon the opportunity to beat out the 5070 Ti? And does NVIDIA's upper mid-range option make any sense in the current GPU landscape? Well, today I'm going to be discussing just that, because we've retested the 5070 Ti and 9070 XT using the latest in game optimizations and drivers to see whether AMD have really closed the gap and whether the 5070 Ti is a card you just shouldn't buy anymore. Let's do this. Corsair Custom Labs is here and supports a wide range of products and components, now including PC memory. Simply choose your desired Vengeance RGB configuration of speed and capacity and pick from one of the amazing custom designs. Whether you're into sci-fi or this amazing variation of Cherry Blossom, there's a myriad of options to pick from. You can match your peripherals with the same Custom Labs design too for a fully unified gaming setup, and even configure multiple product designs at once with live renders. Learn more about Corsair Custom Labs and check it out for yourself at the first link in the description below. Now I want to start with some important context. The RTX 5070 Ti launched first and came out with an MSRP of $749. This was a $50 price reduction over the last generation 4070 Ti, and although the 5070 Ti naming scheme might suggest this is a small upgrade from a 5070, it's more like a 5080 Lite, positioning itself much closer to the $1,000 GPU in terms of performance than to the cheaper $549 5070. That then might make the price of this card sound like a relative bargain. $749 for a card that provides similar performance to the 5080, that's a GPU with a $1,000 MSRP, sign me up. But not so fast. AMD then came along with this, their RX 9070 XT, and it's for all intensive purposes been one of AMD's most successful GPUs ever. It goes toe-to-toe with the 5070 Ti on video memory. You get 16 gigs on both, though it should be noted this is only GDDR6, whereas the 5070 Ti gains GDDR7. And AMD finally seemed to have closed the gap too on things like ray tracing and even frame generation. Yes, you don't get the multi-frame generation currently touted by NVIDIA. That's where they used AI to interleave more than one additional frame for every real rasterized frame to massively increase frame rates, but otherwise they seem to be thereabouts. And in AMD's flashy unveiling, they boasted naturally about how this was going to be a lot cheaper, just $599 at MSRP versus NVIDIA's $749 price tag on the 5070 Ti. Again, not so fast. AMD's price point on the 9070 XT has been until now a bit of a joke, really. They were exposed when the card first launched for only shipping certain batches for retailers to sell at MSRP. Overclockers here in the UK said they had a limited number to sell at the MSRP price point, and once these were sold out, the price would have to rise as AMD were essentially subsidizing the lower price in the back end. And it appeared as though AMD's continual strategy over the years, which has been to sort of put their finger in the air and go, I think that's a good price point, seemed to have paid dividends. In fact, there was actually one launch where AMD invited me to a press briefing and said, how much do you think we should charge for this particular graphics card? I think my answer was less than the NVIDIA option. Now, the reason that's relevant is because the pricing mess that was created with the 9070 XT was actually done because these cards landed with retailers before AMD had actually decided on a price. And the price they eventually decided on was a lot more aggressive than I think people had perhaps forecast. Now, that's a good thing, and that shows that AMD were ready to take the battle to NVIDIA. But again, I think you can see where this is going. Not so fast. We had tariffs, we had GPU shortages, and we ended up with this perfect storm of really bad circumstances. That led the RTX 5070 Ti to be a little price inflated, but the 9070 XT to sell for quite frankly ludicrous pricing. This wasn't helped by the fact that all the reviews, ours included, for the 9070 XT were overwhelmingly positive, and at the time it launched, it slotted just below the 5070 Ti, but for a much more attractive price point. point in theory. Now the reality is that pricing on the 9070 XT has only just started to settle to a level that is recommendable. Currently on Newegg you can find a 9070 XT for as low as $669. That's around $70 more than the MSRP. That is still an inflated price, but it's one that actually represents a saving of around $100 versus the 5070 Ti. Here in the UK the gap's a little wider, with the RTX 5070 Ti now going for as low as £689. Again, it's only a choice of one model, and the RX 9070 XT dropping below the £570 mark, which makes it really pretty remarkable value for money. All of this has been aided by the fact that AMD, like they always do, have been continually iterating and improving the drivers on their GPUs since launch, essentially giving them the fine wine analogy where their cards age like wine. They get better as they get older. There's a couple of reasons for this. They're the underdog, right? They have a lot less market share than NVIDIA, they sell a lot less GPUs than NVIDIA, and their likely starting point is a little more rough around the edges than what Team Green have to offer. The reason we don't really get driver optimizations from NVIDIA that really push performance forward is because A, they don't really need to, and because B, often out of the box they seem to have extracted a bit more from the hardware package than Team Red. So with the 9070 XT now decidedly cheaper than the 5070 Ti, and actually in stock and available to buy, how do the two cards stack up with these new driver optimizations and updates accounted for? Well, this is where our testing comes in, and the first game we retested from scratch was F1 2025, doing so at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, and using a variety of settings, whether that be DLSS, FSR, ray tracing, all to compare how these two cards would stack up. And I was pleasantly surprised to see the RX 9070 XT win out pretty much across the board. At rasterization first at 1080p using the ultra-high preset, the RX 9070 XT pulls in around 288 frames per second, giving you around a 22 FPS upside on the 5070 Ti at the same settings. Move up to 1440p at the same ultra-high preset, and the gap does narrow slightly, with the 9070 XT pulling in just over 230, and the RTX 5070 Ti pulling in just over 216 FPS. Move up to 4K again at rasterization, and the 9070 XT wins out again with 143, providing an upside of around 11 FPS on the 4K ultra-high result at rasterization from the 5070 Ti. Now this is just one game, but at rasterization, the 9070 XT is now the faster GPU. But what about the DLSS, the FSR, the ray tracing, the areas where NVIDIA has historically won out? Well, again, look at the numbers that we've run, and let's start off at 1080p ultra-high with FSR and DLSS set to their respective quality settings and ray tracing enabled. Again, the 9070 XT wins out by a smaller margin, but 6 frames per second more nonetheless. At 1440p on the ultra-high preset, with FSR again on quality and ray tracing enabled, or in the case of NVIDIA, DLSS on quality, but no frame generation, and the RX 9070 XT achieves 133 to the 5070 Ti's 124. And this pattern continues too at 4K, where there's a frame rate upside of only 0.4 frames per second, but the AMD card wins out in every metric. In Cyberpunk 2077 at rasterization, an area where the 9070 XT did lag behind NVIDIA by quite a margin, you still see the 5070 Ti win out in some instances. 1080p high, for example, sees it achieve around 11 FPS more than its AMD counterpart, and 1440p high sees the card separated by 0.6 FPS, with the 9070 XT losing very marginally. Move through to 4K though, and the 9070 XT actually takes the lead with around 1 frame per second of extra performance, so again, not a huge amount to set them apart. But turn on FSR and DLSS on the quality preset and enable frame generation. So on NVIDIA this is 2x, so we've got 1 fake frame for every real frame, and on AMD we've got the same. And the 9070 XT actually wins out, 204 FPS versus 165. At 1080p high with FSR on the quality preset and frame gen once again enabled, the 9070 XT pulls in a staggering 400 or so frames per second, beating out its closest NVIDIA rival, while at 1440p, the Radeon 9070 XT beats out its NVIDIA counterpart again by a really big chunk. What's really interesting though is the performance difference from the 9070 XT from launch to today. In Cyberpunk at 4K rasterization as one example, you'll currently achieve 78 FPS from the 9070 XT. At launch that was just 68 frames per second. That's an uplift of around about 15%, which is enormous. A focus in on ray tracing also provides some interesting results, and take note when you look at these of the visual difference of the side-by-side sides too. And here at 1080p high settings, we see the Radeon 9070 XT win out against NVIDIA. That's with RT on medium, FSR on quality, and frame gen enabled. Here we see a difference of around about 53 frames per second all told, which is a lot. I think the NVIDIA image does look a bit better, but the frame rate on AMD is more advantageous. We'll move up to 1440p, and the 9070 XT wins out, while even at 4K we see a stronger result from AMD than we do from the 5070 Ti for NVIDIA. In Call of Duty's Black Ops 6 Zombies, the 9070 XT has a great showing as well. Here at 1080p high rasterization, the 9070 XT pulls in 215 to NVIDIA's 194 FPS. At 1440p high, it pulls in 173 to NVIDIA's 155 FPS. And at 4K high, the 9070 XT pulls in 118 to NVIDIA's 101. What's really interesting here as well is if you look at the evolution, the 118 frames per second achieved today was only 112 FPS at launch. Now that 6 frames per second might only represent around a 5% performance improvement, but 5% here, 10% there can make a big difference, especially when the only thing that really disadvantaged the 9070 XT previously was that it fell behind Team Green in more instances than not, and that no longer appears to be the case. I mean, heck, even with frame generation enabled, you just have to look at this graph to see that AMD are totally dominating. Now the good news is that AMD seem to have really managed to extract the maximum out of their latest RDNA 4 architecture, and there's hopefully lessons there they can take forward into their next gen RDNA 5 releases, and hopefully some higher end cards for good measure. But to answer the question at the start of the video, which is the 5070 Ti dead? I kind of think the answer is yes. The 5070 Ti is still a really strong GPU. You just have to decide whether the NVIDIA price premium is worth it for you. Over on GeekaPC, which is my UK pre-building company, we sell, I'd say, slightly more 9070 XTs than we do 5070 Ti's. And the feedback we get from you guys looking at the systems is that some of you want an NVIDIA GPU. And that's something I want to offer, to try and stay as unbiased and as impartial as possible. Let you guys choose, and that's the best scenario. But I don't see why, looking at this data, you would buy the 5070 Ti over the 9070 XT. Unless, of course, we look at the fact that the 5070 Ti's price point is kind of there to tempt you into a 5080. You see, the thing is, without the 5070 Ti, the jump between the 5070 and 5080, which otherwise to the untrained eye seems like a one-tier move, looks enormous. The card is essentially double the price in real world when we look at the 5080 versus 5070. And for many people, the 5070 Ti is the aspirational stepping stone that you go if you want better performance but maybe can't quite afford the 5080's price tag. I think really NVIDIA's lack of a GPU at the price point of the 9070 XT just underlines a big gap that they currently have in their lineup. When you look at the 5070 to 5070 Ti, there's an enormous hole there that needs to be filled. And it's the same, to be clear, with AMD. AMD's current lineup sees them go from $350 to $550. And really what we need to see are more options in and around the mid-range that give you guys a bit more choice. AMD should be commended for the great work they've done on the 9070 XT, and it's great looking at this data to see how far they've progressed. But on the basis of the 5070 Ti, it's not quite dead. I just don't completely know why you would buy one unless you're really motivated by NVIDIA specific features and the overall NVIDIA experience, which does remain a little better than what you'll find from AMD. What do you guys think of these GPUs? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.